Well, hello, good afternoon. Hopefully you can hear me. Welcome to today's webinar. What do we know of Microsoft BizTalk Migrator so far? So we've got a great webinar in store for us today. What we will cover is we'll talk about why we have a BizTalk Migrator in the first place. We'll talk about what we know of the BizTalk Migrator so far. In other words, what's been released from Microsoft. We'll have a run through of the screenshots that Microsoft have released, and we will recap on some of the main questions as a prelude to a Q&A. So we have got Q&A. The Q&A is enabled on this Teams webinar, so feel free to ask questions at any point during the webinar, and we'll either answer them behind the scenes or we'll get through to them later and we'll answer them on the webinar. So at any time, feel free to ask any questions you need via the Q&A. So presenters today, hello, I'm Andrew Rivers, I'm a Director of 345 Technology, and we have a long association with BizTalk and integration in general, because integration is the on-ramp to making your business built on data. And I'm joined today by Dan Probert, who is the CTO of Affinus, and he is the world expert in BizTalk to Azure migration. So really excited for you to hear from the master himself on this presentation. Hello, Dan.
Hey, Andrew. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
And this webinar is brought to you by Azure Integration Group, and this is an initiative that's been started by my company and Dan's company, and we're looking to share information and best practice on the subject of Microsoft integration and BizTalk to AIS migration in particular. So we're here to provide support, information, knowledge sharing, guidance to technical teams who work for BizTalk customers, and also any consultancies or Microsoft partners that support BizTalk customers. We're more than happy to share knowledge with you as well. And you can find out more at azureintegrationgroup.com. So what I'm going to do now, just bear with me because I'm still getting used to running the controls, but what we're going to talk about next is really why. So maybe this is where we can start picking up with you, Dan. So why have we got a BizTalk Migrator?
Thanks, Andrew. Well, I think that's a really interesting question. BizTalk's obviously been around for a while now. I mean, I started working with BizTalk 2000, BizTalk 2002, and it's a well-established legacy product on premises only. And I think for anyone watching the sort of cloud space, there's always had a thought about what happens in the BizTalk world with the cloud. There's been changes to BizTalk over time in terms of adding, more and more cloud capabilities. But I think it's been a little bit unclear in terms of what do you do in terms of the cloud with BizTalk. Are you supposed to be running BizTalk in the cloud, or are you migrating to something else? So I think it's quite timely that Azure Integration Services are now getting to a point where they're mature enough that we either have equivalents, or you can at least see how you would architecturally try and achieve some of the things you were doing on BizTalk today. So I think the need, it's quite interesting, Microsoft's announcement here, because I think there's a definite need for something like this in the space, because I know from the clients we've worked with, it's quite difficult to explain to people how and why you would be doing this. Why are you migrating, and specifically how would you be doing it? So I think there is a need for a tool or tooling, and I'm really glad to see that Microsoft are taking initiative here to produce something for why we would want to go from BizTalk to the cloud. And I'm assuming by the cloud we're talking about AIS, Azure Integration Services.
Yeah, that's right. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the Azure Integration Services stack. And one of the interesting things about that problem space is that in many ways BizTalk as an integration technology and AIS as an integration technology, they do the same thing, but in terms of how they're built, it's like chalk and cheese, isn't it? So that kind of gives us a bit of a driver as to why people need some tooling to help migrate, because it's not a simple upgrade. It's a rebuild from the ground up. Because we're used to doing this sort of thing for clients manually, and so we kind of know the degree of sort of re-engineering that you need to do. So fundamentally, it's a very different beast. So let's just move on very quickly and talk a little bit about, sort of in a nutshell, what do we know so far? Because earlier in June there was the Integrate 2020 conference, which took place online, and at that Microsoft made a couple of announcements in a couple of the presentations that talked about the BizTalk Migrator. So what we know so far, firstly, that the BizTalk Migrator will be released in the fall 2020. I've obviously translated into English here, but that later in the year we weren't told a particularly accurate time frame, just in the autumn this year. Another thing that's interesting, and this follows trends in the industry, that it's going to be open source, that the migration tool would be delivered via command line, and installed via Chocolatey. We'll talk a little bit about this later, and that it would run against exported BizTalk MSIs. I mean, most of the people on the call are probably in the BizTalk world already, and so you know that you can deploy a BizTalk application and export it as an MSI, and that kind of takes the whole application and packages it up. So that's what the tool is going to run against. We know that the tool will create a report on the BizTalk application, and say, presumably, again, we'll look at this in more detail, but presumably it'll tell us a lot more about how we can migrate or what the output's going to look like, and that converts to AIS, or Azure Integration Services, and in particular Logic Apps. So I suppose moving on from there, what we've got next, Dan, is we've got we were given a diagram that showed the stages of how this tool is going to run. So can you just unpack this a little bit, because this diagram's got so much in it. I think we just need a little. Can you talk us through this a little bit, and what you think this means based on your experience?
I mean, it's quite interesting. There's a number. I mean, there's very little information obviously we've been given. So this diagram was in the I can't remember, it was in John Fancy's talk or Valerie Thomas's talk at the Integrate 2020 conference, but they displayed this diagram, and what I can see from here is that it looks like Microsoft are taking I would say a very good approach here to break the problem space down. So, I mean, you can make a lot of assumptions here from the names of what we can see on the diagram. So, I mean, we're seeing a discover, what looks like a discover shape there, then parse, analyze, report, convert, and verify. So this looks like some sort of pipeline that's running here with the arrows running between them. So I'm guessing from here that the tool will run us through all these different phases. I don't know quite how that works. I don't know quite how it's configured or anything like that. We'll have to wait until the tool's released. But you can make some assumptions here that the discover part here is taking in, it's showing a BizTalk MSI, and it's showing a BizTalk group, and also what looks like a Visual Studio BizTalk solution. So I'm guessing those are the inputs to the tool. So I know Valerie only talked about MSIs, but it's interesting they're talking about BizTalk Group and BizTalk Solution. So I don't know if you're familiar, Andrew, that there's an existing migration tool that the team released, or the product group released, to migrate BizTalk EDI solutions. So effectively, it's just taken to an integration account. And that worked not through an MSI, but that worked by actually connecting to your BizTalk host group. So we connect to the SQL Server database that underlies BizTalk to read information from there. So it looks like Microsoft are thinking that there are multiple ways you could supply your input. parsing, I think, probably makes sense here. We're going through and understanding everything that's inside your BizTalk application. So orchestrations, pipelines, schemas, maps. I'm really happy to see orchestrations there. That's one of the most challenging things when you think about migration of BizTalk solutions today, is how do you handle orchestrations? I'm not quite clear. I'm guessing analyze. It's got the same boxes in it as parse. So I'm guessing that you're probably parsing, say you're parsing an orchestration and understanding what you've got, and then analyze is probably, I mean, there's a report at the end here that comes out that explains what you've got, and I know Valerie showed some screenshots of that, so I can only guess that analyze is probably working out what can and can't be converted, is my guess. At least that's what I would be doing. Report seems fairly self-obvious. It's going to output a report, and we've seen some screenshots of that. And then convert, I think, is fairly self-explanatory as well. You get converted. I don't know what the tool's going to output. Will it upload things automatically to Azure? Is it going to output ARM templates? I don't know.
Yeah, we haven't heard anything about that yet, have we? So
no, exactly.
It's been very quiet.
That's a complete unknown around that. And then again, verify. Well, there we go. Look, there's a box on there, deploy app, run tests. So that would be really interesting, because that would be something that I know. So we've done, an amount of work with migrating or manually migrating people from BizTalk to Azure. And one of the questions that comes up is, how do you test that? How do you make sure that what you've taken from on-prem and moved up to Azure works? So testing is going to be paramount here. Having the ability to run tests to compare that what you had on-prem is the same as what you've got up in Azure. But yeah, I mean, I think this is a very sensible approach, because it's looking like what they've done is they've broken it down into a number of stages, a number of parts or stages here that the tool can run through. And they've grouped the first 4 of those, discover, parse, analyze, and report, under this assessment. Then there's conversion and there's validation. And I think that's really interesting, because there's a little red dot that says report only. So my assumption with that is that assessment group can be run standalone. So you could just run it over, say, your BizTalk group, and you'd get a report. I'm assuming the report's going to tell you through either what's in your BizTalk application or what can be converted. I'm not sure.
Or maybe a bit of both, because that in itself is a valuable thing, isn't it? It's certainly to, a lot of companies have had a BizTalk consultancy come in the past, and they've given them a BizTalk app, and they may have gone away.
Yeah.
And so so some companies will have an ops team that are running these apps, but actually they may not have an awful lot of knowledge inside the company as to what they do. So the ability to just report on it and to see whether it's, see what you've got and see whether it's migratable is actually quite an interesting thing.
That's very, very true, actually. In fact, today, the only real documentation tool that you've got is the BizTalk Documenter, which has been around for some time, and I've used multiple times. So I think if that was an alternative to the BizTalk Documenter, if it was giving either the same details or greater details, that would be actually really, really useful. And as you say, if you've had a consultancy in writing a BizTalk application, I've seen this many times at some of our clients where they have a BizTalk application in production, but no documentation on it. So just the ability to document that would be really, really useful. If that's what the report does, that would be really, really useful. So.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to move on, and what we'll look at next is the next kind of the next slide, image, whatever you call it, that Microsoft released, and this is quite a beast to decipher, because it's got it's a, and again, John Fancy from Microsoft talked about this, but it's kind of when you decompose an application. In this case, it's from what we can see on the screen, we've got, it talks about flat file decoder and and transform. So this is obviously like a of messaging with a flat file, but it's a big piece of design, given a very what in BizTalk terms is a really simple kind of receive port and pipeline. So what's this trying to say?
Well, this is really, really interesting. From what I'm looking at this, a couple of things jump out to me. So I'm an architect, and I've been an enterprise architect for many, many years. And one of the things I've noticed on this slide, I was thinking about this a lot, especially at the time that Microsoft were presenting this, is things like, if we're looking there, we've got content-based router, the bottom left there. And then there's a routing slip router as well, mention of routing slip. So routing slip and content-based router are both enterprise patterns. So there's a classic book, the Enterprise Integration Patterns book, where they mention both of these as patterns.
Yeah, I think actually we've got a little slide of that. We'll just have a quick look at that.
Yeah. So for example, there's a content-based router, so something coming in where your router will look generally at a routing slip, but decide where it goes to next, and then we've got the concept there of after that of a routing slip. So with a routing slip, you're looking up, and this is very similar to what, I don't know if you remember, Andrew, if you ever looked at what was WABs and then became MABs. So Microsoft Azure BizTalk Services, and you had the concept of an itinerary. So the idea, which is again is a pattern, that you can, instead of hard coding your building blocks together, that you can have an itinerary or a routing slip that dictates where the things go. So instead of going A to B, you can go A to C.
I mean, this is classic sort of enterprise service bus stuff, isn't it?
It is, yes, very much so. Well, that's what a service bus does, isn't it, really? Yeah. So I think it's really interesting. If we go back to that previous diagram there, I think it's really interesting they're showing that, because what I can see looking at this, this to me, looking at it, so we've got an FTP adapter, we've got a flat file decode. This is a Veta pipeline, okay? So we've got, we're extracting some information. There's a transform in there as well. And then it looks like we're routing it somewhere else. So to me, it looks like there's an attempt here to break things down into patterns of some sort. So maybe based upon enterprise patterns. I mean, the names here seem to indicate that would be the case. And to my mind, this would be a very sensible thing to do. And if you're taking something as complex as a BizTalk application, and you're wanting to migrate that to, say, Azure, where there is a lot of commonality, but it's just that it's implemented in a completely different way. The example I often have used in the past when I talk about migration from BizTalk to Azure is that it's not like you're going, say, from two similar languages. It's not like you're going from French to English where there's some commonality in the languages there. It's more like you're going from English to a complete alien language. I mean, take the movie Arrival, for example, where you've got an alien language and you're trying to break that down. How do you translate between them? And what you've got to do is take it to building blocks, to find commonalities that all languages would share. And I suspect that's what Microsoft are doing here. We're seeing patterns. Could you do that? Could you apply enterprise patterns to BizTalk? I mean, we're all aware that BizTalk implements enterprise patterns under the hood, where, as BizTalk developers, we're familiar with correlation or convoys or something like that. They're all enterprise patterns, which BizTalk does for us. In fact, BizTalk implements certain patterns for us. The content-based routing is what BizTalk does out of the box, and
it almost forces you into it so much that you almost don't realize you're using the pattern.
You don't realize you're using it, exactly. Pub sub is a pattern. Request response is a pattern. Yeah. They're all there. They're provided for you out of the box. But some of those you don't have equivalents for in AIS. Well, you do, but you'd need to combine logic apps and service bus and sessions and things like that to create them. So this seems like a really sensible idea here, to take what is in BizTalk and break it down into a series of patterns, because once you have it as a series of patterns, it would be much easier then to work out how would you do it in AIS. But this to me looks very much like a bus scenario here, where you're coming in from the FTP adapter, you're running through a routing slip router, which I'm guessing, it's resolving a routing address, it's routing to a resource. It looks like they're using Azure App Config there as well. We can see an integration account holding your flat file schema and your XML schemas, and I'm assuming that would be holding your transforms as well.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of clues in this as to the whole stack, doesn't it? Because you can see, you can see that the integration accounts up there at the top. You can see you've got Azure App Config up at the top. You can see we've got a service bus topic, so we can kind of see that. We can kind of see that this isn't just Logic App. This is actually using the full kind of AIS stack to actually provide a solution.
And that's really important, actually. That AIS is a name for a grouping of technologies in Azure. You Logic Apps, Service Bus, integration accounts. I mean, you can extend it to include Event Grid, I suppose API connections, on-premise data gateway, storage, functions. All of those make up the toolkit that we have for implementing integration solutions in Azure today. So I'd expect Microsoft to be making use of a lot of those. Intermediary, I know it's a quite interesting point they've got down here. You've got endpoints and intermediaries, because intermediary is again another enterprise pattern. Context properties, calculating context properties, that looks really interesting as well, because that's key. So one of the things that BizTalk does for us under the covers is promotion of context properties to use in subscriptions. Now, BizTalk does that so well that we don't even think about it. We create our context property schemas, and then we just refer to them in subscriptions when we create them. But we don't have the equivalent in AIS. Yes, we have subscriptions in Service Bus, for example. But we don't have the same equivalent of, you don't have the ability to promote properties or anything like that. So it looks like Microsoft are planning to do something here around that. I'd be really interested to see what they've done.
Because it's one of those things, I suppose, that if you were making a tool to do this, that once you've once you've cracked the problem as to how to do that, you can apply that onto every BizTalk app that you migrate then. So it'll be interesting to see what the detail of that comes out like, because it's because that's something that pretty much every integration architect, every integration developer that's developing for the cloud is probably going to want to take advantage of that as a pattern.
Yeah, very much so. It's also interesting in this diagram here that what we're seeing here is a pipeline. These things are connected to each other, but I was just, they make up, if you think of a flat file pipeline today, if I've got an FTP adapter with a flat file pipeline, this is the parts that would make up to it. In fact, this would make up a receive port and receive location, to tell the truth, which I assume is what they're trying to show here. This is the equivalent of coming from FTP and all the way through to the message box, if you assume the message box here is the service bus topic.
Yeah, so if you look at that service bus thing, and that's the equivalent of the message box, then that is a receive location and a receive port with all the the pipeline and the transforms inside it. So, and it just kind of shows you how much of the heavy lifting on that the BizTalk gives you out of the box.
That's very true. We don't think about that as BizTalk developers, that there's so much that BizTalk provides for us in terms of the core functionality that we just use. BizTalk's the equivalent of I was going to say a SaaS solution, but it's really a PaaS solution. It gives us the development tools to run on top, and we just take for granted everything it does underneath. And I guess that's one of the challenges, with trying to recreate integration solutions in Azure, is that we have a lot of different things that are given to us, out of the box with Azure, but some of the things we've taken, for granted with BizTalk aren't there, so would need to be created manually. So I'm really hoping, from the look of this, is that Microsoft are going to provide something, I don't know, a library, new Logic App action, something that will implement these patterns for us and make it much easier. That would be awesome if that's going to be the case.
Yeah, like most people that are probably on this webinar and interested in this space, we're just we've had our appetite sort of sharpened, but we're just waiting to see what comes out of it. But I think what we can do now is move on to actually look at some of the screenshots that have been released of the tool itself, because these are yeah, that just like these diagrams give a fascinating insight that the tool does. So let's just skip on to this. So one of the things, I mean, this is just a bit of a mock-up, but one of the things we said was that it's going to be installed via Chocolatey. So I don't know how many people out there know much about Chocolatey, but it's basically just allows you to, you know, if you package your application up using as a NuGet package, Choco just allows you to install apps via NuGet, and the syntax for installing via Choco is just Choco install, and it's and so if the tool's released as we might expect, that it's called BizTalk Migrator, then installing it would look something like this. I mean, we don't know if that's going to be the exact name when it's released or that's the exact syntax, but installing via Chocolatey will be something like this. But the next slide perhaps is even more, the next couple of slides are even more telling, because these are Microsoft screenshots, and they say, they show some of the options or the commands that we actually have from the tool. So what can we, what do these tell us?
So that's quite interesting when we look at this. I mean, this it's all command line driven, which is intriguing, but it is not surprising. That seems to be the way that Microsoft are going, especially if you're playing around with, say, the Azure CLI versus ARM. It's very detailed with what's going on here, and from what I've looked at from studying this, there's quite a lot going on here. If you look at the bottom there, the assess, migrate, conversion, verify, that comes back to that first diagram we looked at, where there were groupings of those stages. We had assessment, conversion, and validation. So I'm guessing those refer to that, which means that you could actually run the tool just to say do an assess, run only the stages associated with assessment. Yeah.
Yeah, because it actually says that in the text.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Yeah. So assess is discover, parse, analyze, report, and then migrate looks to be all of them. So migrate presumably is end to end.
Yeah.
And then convert is just convert and verify. Interesting. It's interesting that isn't just convert, but it's convert and verify.
Yeah.
And verify is just the last bit, which again, I'm not sure how those would be unpicked from the rest of it, because you kind of think that if you've got a BizTalk application going in at the start, I don't know how you just do a little bit at the end of that, but it certainly looks, intriguing. What I'm going to do now is just move on to the next slide, which is some of the actual, the details of or examples of how you run the command line. So so this is also kind of gives us a bit more insight, doesn't it?
So this is really interesting, because it almost seems like the screenshot before that Microsoft showed. So just a reminder, these are the screenshots that Microsoft released or showed in their presentations at the Integrate 2020 conference. And so, this one's titled Additional Options for BizTalk Migration Package. So I'm guessing the ones before are generic ones to do with the running of the tool. So we saw things about aborting and things like that. So like configuration, whereas these ones here are very specific to supplying BizTalk information. So
yeah, they're example command lines, aren't they?
Yeah, but they're all MSI files, I noticed as well. So in that original diagram we were looking at, where they had a box called Discover, which one of the things off that was the BizTalk MSI. So it looks like this is how you're supplying MSIs. What I'm quite interested in is the fact you can actually supply a folder here. If you look at that third one down under examples, specify directory containing MSI files. So that's interesting, because a lot of the clients we work with, we will generate MSI files for deployment, and there'll be one that an MSI file, it represents an application in BizTalk. So when you export MSI, you're exporting an application. And often, a solution is made up of multiple applications. So I'm guessing this is a way to supply all the MSIs that make up, because you might have references between those MSIs. So this, I'm assuming, is a way that you can supply those. I'm not quite sure how that's handled.
Or if you so let's say, for example, you were still running a really old version of BizTalk and it was unsupported, and you had a group. So let's say you were on extended support for BizTalk 2010 and you thought, we've really got to do something about this. You could just export everything off that group and say, here's this group, and I just want to get all these apps off it. So it sort of allows you to do that, doesn't it? So, but similarly, that's just a similar thing to you saying that that by doing that, that you effectively will be picking up any cross dependencies between those, because obviously you can have dependencies between BizTalk applications in the same group, but not between groups. So it just gives you a chance to sort of pick up those dependencies.
Yes, I noticed that the fourth parameter there is a path to where the HTML report will be written. So I know that one of their screenshots was the report. One last thing to say about MSI files. I've worked with clients and some large enterprise clients where they don't have the source code anymore. So they'll have something running on BizTalk, and it could even be BizTalk 2006. They have an enterprise application running. They don't have the source code to deploy anymore.
The mind boggles, doesn't it?
I know, the mind boggles. But they could export MSIs, which I think is really interesting. So even if all you were going to do is document what you have, that would be really, really useful for those clients. But I guess MSIs to me, make a certain type of sense. I've always assumed that you would be migrating from source code, but at least with the MSIs, what you've got is, what's in production or what's in your UAT, what's in your pre-production environment. You could export an MSI from there and then make sure that your code that you're running through this tool is as close to what you have in production. You might not want to run a development MSI through because it might have different settings in it, or you might have debug code in there, or I don't know. The
other thing is though that you don't want you might not want to give people access to your production. It's like, here's this tool, I'll run it on production. It also gives you the option to sort of stand back from your prod environment and just export the MSIs from that, but you don't have to worry about touching anything in prod.
Yes, very much so. Yes.
Okay, so what we'll do now is the next slide that we've got is actually output from the tool. So as we can see, there's just again, I suppose with a lot of command line tools now, that the output from them gets more and more verbose. Because you haven't got a nice user interface and all that sort of thing, these tools tend to pack more and more information into just the output. So
I can't even read that, Andrew. That's just blurry.
Yeah. So fortunately, what I've done is I've blown up a little bit of that, so to make it a little bit more readable. So again, it's very it's interesting what we can see on this trace here, because we can see that it says it's running discover. It says it's running the stage discover, and then it does some work, and then it says it's running the stage parse. So actually, in this, for the first time, we can actually see that that theoretical diagram that we saw before with those stages is actually, you can sort of see that it's coming out in this trace.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of information coming through there in here. So interestingly, so unpacking. So I'm guessing, they've got an MSI file, they're unpacking the MSI. And then, yes, they are calling them stages as well. So that parse seems to match that first diagram we saw where you had discover, parse, analyze. So we're seeing parse here and we're seeing discover. So it would look like that, what we were talking about earlier, where this looks like a pipeline, if you like, where it's running through a number of different stages. That looks correct. It's difficult to see, but
it's difficult to see. But there's a couple of other interesting things that, from me sort of looking at this closely. It sort of talks at the start in the discover part. It talks about MSI discover, and then assembly discover, which so obviously that's your MSI packages up your assemblies, and so they're all in there. But then further down we've got application definition parser and binding file parser. So if we sort of look at what comes in the BizTalk MSI, basically it's your assemblies. And it's your application definition, which is like a little XML file that gives a bit of information on your application and what the dependencies are. And then there's a binding file, and the binding file is most devs are familiar with binding files because that's what we sort of tokenize and use for deployment. So yeah, we can kind of tell that all those things are being looked for in here. So is there anything else we can kind of, is there anything else we can read in these in these sort of traces here?
No, it's quite difficult to see. I mean, you're quite right. The talk about the assembly information or binding file is really interesting, because yes, you know, and if you think about what's in an MSI file, you're going to have a collection of assemblies and BizTalk assemblies, and a collection of or the binding file as well that comes through as well, and I guess whatever else makes up your BizTalk application. So I don't know. It's hard to see from looking at this, because we don't. I don't know. Did we have a screenshot where they go further on than just here?
No. Well, or rather, I haven't expanded it. The whole thing just seems to end. We haven't got it expanded, but the previous slide where it showed the whole trace just ends with generating a report.
Yeah.
So that's all we know. But what we did see is some example report output. So let's just have a quick look at that and see what we can make of that. So you know, in this example, I mean, obviously it looks like it's been run against a you know, a test application, because the names are fairly meaningless. But we can already see that we've got, you know, in this report, we've got a BizTalk application, and it seems to be showing the different things that belong inside that application. So we can see a receive location, we can see a receive port, and we can see, you know, what looks like some links. I mean, yeah, there are a few information messages, but they don't seem to be telling us very much at this point. So it must be early days on this.
Very much so, yeah.
But what we can do is we can zoom in on this a little bit just to see if we can get a bit of a better view of this. So the only thing we see on this is that there's almost like a parent-child relationship being shown between a couple of things. That, you know, a receive location looks to have a parent of a receive port. So so obviously, as these, you know, as this has been pulled out into the report, you know, these are the links that pull things together, but we can't really see very much at this point.
I'm intrigued by the stars there. It's like an Amazon review. You know,
your application is rubbish.
It would be annoying if the tool starts commenting on your BizTalk application, saying, "Yeah, your implementation here is only a 1-star implementation." I'm not quite sure what that's for, but we'll have to wait and see. I mean, it's interesting because at the top there's a 20%. So yeah, I can
20% for effort.
20% for effort. Yeah, gold star, 1 gold star. So. Yeah. But yes, it's interesting. I'm guessing that the report will break everything down in terms of what was in the MSIs.
Yeah. So we've actually got another slide now that's quite, again, it's quite interesting at that point, because this is a different view. So it looks like it's the similar thing, but in this it's listing sort of. So again, this is listing how a BizTalk MSI is structured. So, you know, so inside an MSI, you have cab files, and the cab files have got the assembly or the bindings in them. And so this almost looks like it's broken down as the hierarchy of what you get inside an MSI as well.
Indeed, I'm interested in the fact that I don't know how many people have ever tried to extract an MSI. It's not something you do for fun, but if you have taken a BizTalk MSI and extracted it out because you need something in it, that's exactly what you find. There's a collection of cab files, and inside those cab files you have, you know, your BizTalk assemblies, you have your binding file. If you're using, you know, receive locations with WCF, there'll be an IIS application in there as well. And that's exactly what we're seeing in this screenshot. So the report is showing a breakdown of what's in the MSI file, which is useful. That's something the BizTalk documentation tool never did, but then I guess it didn't take in an MSI file as input anyway. So
I mean, we can see in this that we've got that assembly there, but and we know what's in a binding file because that basically says what your ports are and that sort of thing. But if we need to do, for example, the example we saw before was like a flat file schema. So where would you know, whereabouts in an MSI would you be pulling the flat file schema from?
It's a good question, actually. In my experience, the schemas are compiled into the assemblies, because if you think about it in Visual Studio, if you're authoring a BizTalk application, you'll have, well, it depends how you decided to group everything together, but you'll put your schemas and your maps. You'll either have your schemas in one BizTalk project and your maps in another, and your pipelines in a different one, or you'll have a project per application where you have your schemas and your maps and everything all together. And those schema files, the XSDs and the BTM, the map files, they get compiled into assemblies. So it's effectively like a class library project in C#. You end up with an assembly that has attributes on it that make it BizTalk specific. So because I've done some of this before in the past, I've used what was .NET Reflector back in the day, but IL Sharp, or IL Spy, I should say, to look into assemblies. And if you look into a BizTalk assembly, you'll actually find the schemas and the maps compiled into those assemblies. So, that's what this tool will be doing. It'll be going through those assemblies, looking through them and pulling out the schemas and the maps. The receive ports and receive locations, I don't think there's any other way of finding them than through your binding file. Unless you're looking at an actual deployed BizTalk application and you're looking in the management database and the MSI, those would be located in your binding file. So I'm guessing if you've got a binding file, it's just parsing through what's in there and looking in the binding info to see what you've got defined in the ports.
Yeah, because of course a binding file, I mean, that's just it's just an XML document, isn't it? So so you can parse that as XML and read all the aspects of the all the port information from that. So it should be quite, I think that should be quite straightforward to get that stuff out. It's just things like, I'm intrigued as to how, again, a bit like you said before, Dan, it's a bit like the question on everyone's lips is how orchestrations are going to be done. I think, yeah.
That's the elephant in the room, isn't it?
It's the elephant in the room is how to do orchestrations, but no, I mean that's the last thing we've seen so far. So yeah, we've had a few glimpses of the BizTalk Migrator, but it's been very much kind of it's been very much a teaser, hasn't it? It's been very kind of very limited, the information we've had out so far, other than what we've just seen. So that's pretty much what we've got so far. Now just looking at where we are into, we're kind of going to move on to the Q&A now. So I think we've got some questions that have been asked on the live event, but we were going to actually start by going through some of the questions that have already been asked of Microsoft, and they're actually really insightful and really key questions. So let's just pick off a couple of these quickly because they're the key ones. So the first one is, what about Business Rules Engine?
That's a really good question. I have no idea how they're going to handle Business Rules Engine, to tell the truth. And I think it comes down to what people are using it for, because I don't know how many BizTalk customers you've been into, Andrew, where they're not using the Business Rules Engine for business rules. They're using it for config. You effectively have got, well, if I've got the situation, then use this value, otherwise use this. That's not so much a rule. That's saying, well, that's configuration information.
It is, but there are very, very limited numbers of ways you can inject configuration into a BizTalk application without redeploying.
No, that's very true. In fact, a more interesting question actually is, what about SSO? If you're using SSO, what about that? But the Business Rules Engine is an interesting one, because I remember back with BizTalk services, people were asking the same question: what would you do with the Business Rules Engine? Because at the time, in my mind at least, people were assuming that MABs was going to be how you'd move from BizTalk to Azure, and then that sort of migrated into Logic Apps and looked very different. But Business Rules Engine was something that was fascinating, because I'm guessing that the Business Rules Engine is a completely separate thing from BizTalk. It's kind of standalone. You install it separately, and I would have thought that Microsoft could find a way of hosting the Rules Engine separately to BizTalk. That's what I would be looking at doing. But I don't know, because there isn't a rules engine in AIS. There's nothing equivalent. There's configuration stores. An integration account is a configuration store. Effectively, it's just sitting on top of storage. But there's lots of open source rules engines that you use instead. So I really don't know. That's a really interesting one, and I think it's probably quite a deal breaker for a lot of people as well who are using BRE. How do you take the investment you've got in existing policy and vocab and migrate that to something that's going to run in Azure? I don't know. I don't think that wasn't mentioned at all in Microsoft's presentation. So
yeah, so it was in the Q&A, but it was there wasn't an awful lot said about it. So the next thing is will it do orchestrations? Well, I think we've seen that we've seen that in that diagram earlier on that we saw orchestrations, but we don't know anything beyond that. The next question is, and this is perhaps an even more, whoever asked this one is a bright cookie, I think, which is what about custom C# code in orchestrations? So what does that point to, Dan?
Well, that's an interesting one. I don't know if you remember at the Integrate conference, was it 2019? Derek Lee was talking about inline code in Logic Apps, and you had JavaScript, and he talked about C# code coming in Logic Apps as inline code. So that would be really interesting. But custom C# code has always been an interesting one, because you've got, if you think about it with an orchestration, you've got two uses for C#. You've either got actual real inline code. So I have an expression shape in my orchestration. I put in some C# code in there, generally to, I don't know, you're looking something up from another class, or you're doing some manipulation on the message that you've got, or you're doing some logging or something like that, exception handling, or you're making a call out to a separate class where you've got a proper implementation. So I think I've always been quite interested in the idea that you could take C# classes, like you have a class library, and wrap them in a function, because functions support arbitrary C# classes. But the thing is what would you be referring to? What are you doing with that custom C# code? And would it make any sense to do that in Azure? So this is a really tricky or thorny problem to solve. I can't see how Microsoft would do it. Yeah,
because there's a couple of things that you raised there that probably just we can expand on very quickly. Don't want to make the whole of this thing about expression code, but one of them is that expression shapes in BizTalk can be abused massively. It's like have an orchestration and then have one expression shape with like 1,000 lines of code in it. If you've done that, you probably deserve all that's coming to you. But in Logic Apps, the whole thing is it's kind of a low code environment. It's almost part of the development paradigm on Logic Apps is very much moving away from sticking all that code in. And I suppose if you were building an equivalent, like we do now, if we're migrating someone from BizTalk to Logic Apps and we're doing it manually, you probably wrap that in a function, and then and consume it as an API rather than actually just having the code embedded.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, it depends what you're doing with your code. I mean, if your C# code is making reference to an on-premise database, how are you going to migrate that? What if it's calling? In fact, actually, this refers to a question that Andy Norris asked, which is that what if it's referring to a custom DLL that you have deployed on your machine, but that's not in your MSI? That's not going to get caught up as well. So I don't know. I'm interested to see how this is approached, how they deal with all this. And there's just not enough information at the moment. So it's just, all we can do is make suppositions.
Yeah. So let's look at the next question is what about EDI, Edifact? That kind of. There's obviously a lot of slight typo in the presentation there. That must be my fault. So yeah, EDI, because obviously a lot of manufacturing companies especially use BizTalk, and they use EDI is one of the big things that BizTalk enabled, and that might be one of the main reasons why it was chosen as a product in the first place.
Yes, so this is a really interesting one, because this is the one area where Microsoft have done work already in terms of migration. There's been a lot of work from what I understand, integration accounts. One of the prime reasons for having them is to support EDI workflows, and that's, you know, with the EDI components that we have today in Logic Apps, with EDI connectors, the Edifact and the AS2 stuff, you can migrate certain solutions. And there was a tool 2 years ago at one of the Integrate conferences, I'm sure it was Divya, but it might have been someone else, was talking about a tool to help you uplift some of your trading partner management from BizTalk on premises. So I think it feels like that's something that they already have there. And I'd be interested to see how that integrates in, or no pun intended, with this tooling, because they have some existing work there already. I don't know. It's EDI is a really interesting area because it's so broad. There's so many different standards and ways that you can implement it. So I don't know in terms of what they're planning to do, but I would imagine that if it's not supported at the beginning, it definitely will be, because this is key for a lot of BizTalk clients. A lot of, you know, BizTalk people chose BizTalk because it's a cheaper route to market for EDI scenarios.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose off the back of that, the next question is, what about Swift?
Yeah, well, that to me, that falls under, I know it's not the same as EDI, but it falls into this idea that back in the day we were using BizTalk accelerators to do this. So there needs to be, I guess, with Swift. Now I'm not too sure because I haven't worked with Swift before, but I know that some of the underlying technologies under Swift, I think, are available in Logic Apps today or in AIS today. But there'd need to be greater support for that. Microsoft, you would need to add greater support for Swift into AIS before you'd be able to migrate. Yeah.
And just, what about low latency?
Now that's a really interesting one, isn't it? Who here's run with a Logic app and it's taken 30 seconds to do an HTTP post? You know,
that's like every time, isn't it?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, there were some interesting announcements also at the conference, which I think would relate to that. I know that Microsoft had done some great work recently in reducing latency. I noticed that earlier this year, certain Logic apps I had running saw an increase in performance with no change on my part. And there's also a preview option I've noticed in Logic apps where you can say if you're running under a high throughput scenario, and I'm wondering what that does to latency as well. I'm interested in the idea of stateless Logic apps, which is probably not to be talked about today, but it's something that they talked about in, I think it might have been Matt Farmer's talk at the Integrate conference. They talked about the idea of stateless Logic apps. So I don't know. I guess it comes down to what do you mean by low latency? You know, BizTalk. You ever tried making BizTalk, work in a low latent way? You know,
yeah, and it's hard. And it's hard, and it's basic, and it's difficult because it's based on polling.
Yeah, exactly. And it's based on SQL Server and different servers and disks, and if you're all SSDs and you decrease your polling interval, then yes, you get better low latency, but then at the cost of no high throughput. Trying to have something that supports high throughput and low latency is difficult with BizTalk. So, I mean, I don't know. It'd be interesting to do a comparison of BizTalk latency against Logic Apps latency today for a similar scenario. Yeah, but no, I don't know what they would do with that. But other than to say that I suspect that's an easy answer.
Yeah, well, we'll have to see. But I think that, so it almost depends as much on Logic Apps as actually the migration tool.
Yes, very much.
So I think one of the last questions we've got on our pre-canned questions is what about order delivery?
Well, that's easy. In my mind, Service Bus supports order delivery today. User sessions, you can have order delivery. And we did see in one of those earlier slides that they were talking about Service Bus topics. So my assumption is that order delivery will be done via the user Service Bus. What if you don't want to use Service Bus? I guess you wouldn't have order delivery. Yeah, I don't know how that's going to be implemented, but given that Service Bus supports it, I wouldn't have thought that would be too difficult to do.
Okay, very insightful. So what we can do now is let's just have a look at some of our some of the questions that have come through on the on the Q&A so far. So, do we have everything possible in Azure that we can do in on-premise BizTalk? That's a great question, and it's a it's a really important one that people want to know if they're migrating. Is is the picture of the future that we're migrating to, does it cover everything that we've got?
That's really interesting. Hi, Himanshu. So it's a difficult one because they're kind of oranges and lemons. They're completely different technologies, although they're attempting to solve the same problem. I think that in terms of parity for features, maybe 80% of the way there, but there's a lot you can do in AIS that you can't do in BizTalk today. But you can create what you need in Azure to do the rest. But it's almost like they're designed to solve different problems. We're cloud to cloud migration in AIS, we're on-prem to on-prem integration in BizTalk. So I don't know, to answer your question. In my experience, we're very close. I think if you were designing an integration application today and you worked out how to do it in BizTalk and somebody said, can you do that in Azure? I think you could probably do, in the majority of use cases, you could probably easily do it in Azure. There'd be a few cases that might be more tricky or at least not clear. If I say, how do I do order delivery, that's harder to do. In BizTalk, you click a checkbox. But for a lot of BizTalk developers, and architects know this, especially when you come to look at throttling and things like that, what does ticking that checkbox actually do under the covers? And that's the sort of thing that you'll be dealing with in Azure. BizTalk hides a lot of stuff from you that you don't have to worry about until you're dealing with large numbers or large numbers of errors and things.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
I suppose we better get through some of these other ones as well. But
yes, 3 minutes left.
3 minutes left. We're probably going to keep going, but if you need to go, don't worry. The link will also give you access to the playback later. So if you need to shoot off, just come back to using the same link that you used to get onto the webinar, and you can see the rest of the playback. Another very interesting question from Andy Norris. Do we know the scope of the tool? Do you know the scope of what the tool will address, especially the hard yards, as in MessageBot subscriptions correlation? This is back to the stuff that BizTalk almost gives you for nothing, and you take for granted, but actually is really hard to do.
Yeah.
Scopes, especially atomic scopes, so making sure that you've got atomic transactions.
Yeah.
Compensation. So, the short answer is there's nothing been announced yet on how much of the tool, how much scope the tool will address. One of the things that Microsoft have said is that they are, they're intending to open source the tool. So part of what is going to, so part of what that means is that some things are going to have to be provided by the open source community, and just from what we know of the tool so far and the way that it seemed to be a load of plugins, that I think Microsoft may be hoping that they can cover the majority of use cases themselves, but perhaps leave some of the more specialist things to say, okay, we've got a coding framework for you to use, we've got an open source project, and they'll probably invite people to contribute to that. So here's another question. Again, another great one from Himanshu. What are the possible alternatives to BAM?
Yeah,
Anything.
I noticed BAM, the BAM that we all love and know. They don't think they even mentioned that, actually. I think this is a question that someone might have asked, but I don't think it got mentioned at all. I mean, BAM is just a collection of database tables and views and stored procedures. So, if but you get automatic ability in BizTalk for writing to them, especially in a performant way. So maybe in the orchestration event stream, for example, where you're not impacting on additional hits in your database by you're piggybacking on the persistence mechanism in BizTalk already. And there's nothing like that in Logic Apps, except tracked properties. You can track business properties today in a Logic app, and it will write them out to application insights. So I don't know. It's an interesting one. I would assume that I don't know if you'd be able to migrate BAM as such, because I don't know how you would do that. I don't know. It's a really interesting one because there's so many different ways you could implement BAM. You could take all those tables and views that you've got already and just put those in Azure SQL or MongoDB or something like that. Or you could use the existing technology and Logic apps with tracked properties to write it out to application insights, which to me would probably be closer to what you're using BAM for. You want a view of your tracked properties visible in some sort of queryable database. Yeah.
Okay, so the next one is, there's a question which is, what's the significance of the brown and green boxes?
Hey, Stuart.
Which I think that might be that's going back to that design slide earlier on.
It's going back to the very first slide. I saw that question popped up after we'd moved on to the slide that seems to show the Veta pipeline. So to answer your question, I have no idea. Microsoft didn't talk about that at all. I'm guessing it might be stuff that is either out of scope or comes later. I don't know. I wondered that myself when I looked at it, but I have no idea.
Okay, and why do you think they've chosen integration accounts rather than using blob storage for things like schemas?
Hey, Dave. That's a really good question. We'd almost need to get John Fancy on here to answer that. But I know that in my understanding, integration accounts are effectively a wrapper. They're a metadata store, but they sit on top of a storage account. And I'm guessing that's why there's a price element attached to them, because you're paying for something that's always there, as opposed to, you can't shut down a storage, an integration account. It's always there, regardless if you're using it. It's sort of that, you're paying monthly for it, regardless of how much use you're getting out of it. I've always felt it would be nice if you could do pay-as-you-go with integration accounts. I don't know. I think the reason that they haven't gone with the blob storage is more to do with the EDI stuff and the trading partner management, because integration accounts, in my view, came from the need to implement EDI functionality. So I'm guessing there's a lot of logic we don't see. It's a bit like BizTalk. There's probably a lot going on in an integration account, a lot of code that we don't see that supports enterprise integration. And if you're only using an integration account for schemas and maps, then yes, why can't you use a storage account? Why can't the XML transform action read a map or a schema for the validator? Why can't, for the flat file to code, why can't that read from a storage account? And I don't know the answer to why Microsoft haven't done that. But I'd say there's probably a lot more going on inside an integration account than just a simple storage account. That's probably why. Okay.
Okay, a couple of more questions that we're going to move on to, but the first one I'm going to sort of do is this, which is a really quick one that even I can answer, is the tool available? So one of the things that that I will actually put on the slide, I'll put on the slide now while we're going through these, is that Microsoft have invited people to get involved in the private preview. So if it's not publicly available, but Microsoft are actually inviting people now to take part in the private preview of the tool. So if you're interested in that, contact Valerie at Microsoft. Valerie's senior program manager for BizTalk, so she's the one that you should go to if you want to actually get an early view of this and take part. And there's another great question here, which is outside the tool itself, but what would be the biggest challenges a company will face when they decide to move all their BizTalk applications to Azure? And I think this is probably the way I'd say this is that this isn't a one-off webinar. We're doing a series, and we're going to look at some of these things in the upcoming episodes. So again, moving on to the next thing, that please do register for the next webinar, where we're going to look at in a bit more detail about what a migrated BizTalk app might look like, and I think that's where some of those challenges that's where we might be talking about that. And the final question is, do we know if Microsoft will supply canned alternatives to any of the accelerators? And again, I think we don't know yet. Fair to say, Dan?
No, there was no mention about any of that, but knowing Microsoft, I would expect either they would, or maybe because they're going down the open source route, they might work with partners to supply that sort of implementation, with the hope, I guess, that it might become part of the open source project as well. I don't know. There's no information on that at all. You can only try and extrapolate from what we do know.
Cool. Okay. So I know we've gone slightly over our time, so we'll look to wrap up now, but please do register for the next one. One of the things I'd like to take the opportunity is to thank everyone for taking part. What we'll do is we'll send a message out to ask you for some feedback, and if you have any other questions, please do get in touch. I'm Andrew Rivers, so you can email me on andrew@345technology, or look me up on LinkedIn. Similarly, Dan there's Dan's contact details, so you can get in touch with Dan or get in touch with him on LinkedIn. And there's so many questions, so many things to talk about that we can't do it all right now. But we are, as individuals and collectively, we just love talking about this problem space. So feel free to get in touch. We'd love to hear from you, and just to share ideas and keep this discussion going. So please do get in touch, and I think we can just about wrap up. Is there anything else you'd like to add, then?
I think just that there's some really good questions in here that we haven't answered. So I'm hoping that we might be able to come up with a way to answer them and publish them somewhere, linked to the series of webinars, maybe on the same place where we post the link to the recording of this. Either that, or we start looking at some of those questions next week in the next webinar as well, because there's a lot of really rich stuff that comes out of this when we start looking at how you migrate a BizTalk application to Azure. We'll be talking about this next week. What does a BizTalk application look like in Azure? If we haven't got to your question today, we will answer it.
Yeah, that's great. So on that note, I'd like to say, thank you to everyone for attending today. Please do tune into register for the next webinar. It's going to be 2 weeks today, not 1 week. So, and we will look at some of this in more detail. And again, drop us a line or ask us questions in the next webinar, and we'll just keep this conversation going, because it's such an exciting problem space. We're looking forward to you coming on the journey with us, and finding out more about this whole area of BizTalk migration. So thanks a lot for that, and we will see you soon. Okay, bye now.
Thanks everyone. Bye.